桁違いの凄さだぜ。ファイナルファンタジー5スーパーファミコンで好評発売中。
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Player One Start. In today's video, I have something kind of unique to show you. It's a new console to my collection that I've actually had for a little while, but just haven't showcased yet. And that is the Super Famicom. The Super Famicom is the Japanese equivalent of the Super Nintendo, and it came out first before any other console worldwide. It came out in the US as the Super Nintendo, but when it came out in the UK, they actually kept this same console design, just changed it to Nintendo Entertainment System instead of what it says here, Super Famicom. So it is kind of interesting that they decided to go with the boxy look in America, but not the rest of the world. They just kept this design. But hey, it is what it is. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video is because I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I decided to collect a Super Famicom, and why, if you want to play Japanese games, it's not actually necessary to collect this thing. But first, why did I collect a Japanese Super Famicom? Well, first off, I really enjoy the name. I really like the fact that this is called a Famicom. It kind of has a Japanese pronunciation to it, but it's based on the English words for family computer. So you can chalk it up to my childhood nostalgia of loving the Super Nintendo back in the day, but what I really wanted to get this for was so I can play some of the Japanese exclusives that we didn't get here in North America. Also, the next thing I'm going to work on is actually cleaning up and restoring these consoles so I can showcase them in the Ultimate Super Nintendo review. And I have a couple of questions for you. First, would you like to see a video of me restoring these consoles? And do you think I absolutely need to? Is it a necessity that I actually retrobrite these systems? I've had some success retrobriting things in the past. In fact, I have a couple of videos that I've retrobrited things on. If you want to see those, they'll be in the description below. So I actually have the capability of doing it, but is it actually worth it to retrobrite these things, and could I be potentially damaging the plastic? So let me know about your thoughts about those in the comments below. And also let me know if you'd like to see a video of me cleaning up and restoring these consoles for the Ultimate Super Nintendo review. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few of the Japanese exclusives that didn't make it over here to the States that I want to show you from my Super Famicom library. The first game that I wanted to import for the Super Famicom was the Final Fantasy V game that never released here in the United States. I actually already had this game translated in English on the PlayStation 1 and the Final Fantasy Anthology Collection, but I really wanted to go back and play it on its original platform. As you can tell though, with RPGs, you have to be very wary of them because the Japanese language barrier is a huge issue with these games. Although some things are written in English, most of the stuff you're going to want to look at is going to be listed in Japanese. There are a couple ways I have of circumventing this. First, since I've already played the game in English, I kind of knew where things were, so I didn't really have to worry about it too much. But for things where I really needed to know what these characters stood for, I actually got out the Google Translate app on my iPhone and pointed it at the screen. And for the most part, it translated it just well enough for me to tell which button was which. However, if you are hoping that it would translate the long narratives into something cohesive, sadly it does not. It wasn't too expensive to import this game, so that's why I went ahead and pulled the trigger anyway, and I was surprised how far I got into this game before I actually had to start pulling out the strategy guide and the Translate app. But for the most part, I'm going to say that most of you will probably not want to import this game this way, and you should seek out one of the English translated ones instead. That said, one thing I like about this game is the way you can customize each of your characters by assigning them any job that you want them to have. In most Final Fantasy games prior to this, each character's job was part of their personality and you couldn't change them from the beginning. However, in this game, you can make a character a knight and then switch them to a mage, and they can learn each other's abilities, eventually giving you a lot of flexibility with your characters. If this is something that does not interest you, it can become very cumbersome very quickly. And overall, I don't think the story in this game lives up to the strong narratives that Final Fantasy eventually became known for. So for a genre that's very heavily driven by story, I would say that's not why I played this game. I just really enjoyed the battle system and being able to change jobs, so it kind of kept me interested throughout the entire game. Parodius is a game that gets its name for the genre that it parodies. The name Parodius is a combination of the words parody and gradius. So as you can guess, this is a shoot-'em-up game that is very, very strange in my opinion. This is actually the second in the series, and this did make it outside of Japan, being released for the European Super Nintendo. However, it was not released in the States, at least on the Super Nintendo. So to summarize the story in this game, the Great Octopus has threatened Earth. To help Parodius save the planet, you and his friends must begin your search for truth. As you search all over the world, you must find the enemy and destroy him. And from there, you're off. Gamers who have played Gradius in the past should be more familiar with how the weapons in this game work. You get to choose one of 4 different characters: Vic Viper, Octopus, Twin B, and Pentaro. And those of you that have played Twin B should be familiar with how you power up the weapons with bells. These bells act as one-time power-ups, allowing the player to destroy every enemy on screen, fire huge beams of energy, and more. The enemies and environments of this game are some of the most creative I have seen in a game of this era. Most of these show strong inspiration from the Gradius games and Twin B, as well as being mixed in with a variety of anime-style opponents. As someone who has played a lot of these scrolling shooter games in the arcades and on home consoles, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this game. The unique animation visuals and themes that are shown throughout this game are just something that kind of kept me into it, wondering what on earth you were going to see next. If you want to play an excellent Japanese shooter that did make it over to the States, this is one I would recommend for your collection. Gokujo Parodius, translated as Pursuing the Past Glory, and also known as Fantastic Journey, is a 1994 scrolling shooter game that was developed by Konami, and is the 3rd entry in the Parodius series. After playing the previous entry, I had to see what the next game in this series would offer, and again it offered a lot more of the same, just unique visuals with a mixed match of 2 different franchises along with different anime concepts. However, this game actually seems to expand out and include more games to draw inspiration from, such as R-Type, Xevious, Galaga, and Thunder Force. This game is another one in the series that I feel really knocks it out of the park, and I had a lot of fun playing. Another great shooter that just never made it over here I would love to have played back in the day, and I'm very glad to have it in my collection now. Poppin' Twin B is a top-view shoot-'em-up game that was originally released in 1993 for the Super Famicom by Konami. This game was also released in PAL regions for the Super Nintendo, but not in the US. Most of you probably never played this game until 27 years later, when it was released in the Nintendo Switch Online update in February of 2020 to the Super NES library. I will say I did consider it more worth it to import this game before it was released on the Nintendo Switch, and I did. But for me, nothing beats playing these games on the original hardware on a CRT. So in that respect, I would definitely recommend this game. Again, this is another well-capable shooter, very well designed, had a unique concept that's something I didn't see over here in the United States for a while. And again, I'd give this game a thumbs up. Alright, let's give this a shot. Mickey no Tokyo Disneyland Daiboken? Yeah. Translated as Mickey's Great Adventure in Tokyo Disneyland, is a video game for the Super Famicom starring Mickey Mouse, published by Tomy on December 16, 1994 in Japan. In this game you control Mickey, however you will be using his balloon backpack machine that can use water or gas balloons to help Mickey traverse through the stages. The water and gas balloons deal the same damage to enemies, but they work in different ways. Water balloons can help you cross ice or air obstacles, and breaking bricks and blocks that hold treasure. They can also be tossed against enemies, but gas balloons I felt to be more useful in the game, as they can be used to get across pits, travel faster underwater, and so on. Overall, I did have quite a lot of fun with this game, although it was very brief in my opinion. I think I beat this on only my 2nd try playing through it. But again, the language barrier wasn't a big problem with this one, and I was able to understand the controls quite easily. Mario & Wario is a special type of game because it requires the Super Famicom mouse to play. But don't worry, if you don't have the Super Famicom mouse, the Super Nintendo mouse will also work. Basically in this game, you will focus on guiding your character across various objects by activating platforms at the correct time. I started out with Princess Peach because she was the easiest to control, but you can choose Mario for normal difficulty. I got really addicted to this game as I do enjoy the puzzle platforming nature of all the levels that you will traverse. I'd actually like to see this game released on Nintendo Switch Online so you can play it on Nintendo Switch with touch controls instead of the mouse. Or maybe even on mobile phones, as I feel like that this is a game that a lot of people would like to play, but may not have access to. If you have a Super Famicom and a mouse, definitely recommend this game as a requirement for your collection. Go-Go Ackman is based on a Japanese manga series that was written and illustrated by Akira Toriyama, and from what I've been told, it plays mostly the same as its predecessor with a few small tweaks. Basically, this game is an action platformer that you can run through and kind of play as a hack and slash, but there is a bit of a learning curve getting into this game, and again, I think the language barrier completely made me miss out on the story of this game. But overall, it wasn't too hard to pick up and play, it was just more difficult to master. The game, again, is not very long. I think it only has 5 stages, but it may take you a while still to get through this game, as it is very challenging, especially in certain parts of the game. It actually took me a while to get past the beginning here because I had to go through and kind of master getting through this section, so I had all of my life bars facing this boss. I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but if you are a fan of tough hack and slash action platformers, this one would be for you. Now, I also want to point out that I collected a few games that also came out here in the United States, and that is the second reason why I decided to get a Super Famicom over collecting those for the Super Nintendo. So let's take a look at an example here. The Mega Man X trilogy is a very good, almost about the prime of Mega Man, at least in my opinion. Those games sold very well in Japan, and as far as I can tell, the first entry sold very well here in the United States. But Mega Man X2 and X3 apparently didn't sell that well. That's because when you look at the price chart or price guides for this and what they're being listed for on eBay, it's actually really expensive to collect the North American version. Just take a look at what it costs to collect Mega Man X2 here in the United States. That is just the cartridge only. That doesn't include the box art or the manual. That is an insane price, but if you think that's too high, you should take a look at Mega Man X3. Oh my gosh, is that even higher? Again, the price I'm showing here is just the loose price, cartridge only. And that is a shame because, unfortunately, that is way out of my budget because I have to collect a bunch of titles for the Super Nintendo to show in the upcoming Ultimate Super Nintendo review. So, to get these games on original hardware, I decided to go ahead and import the Japanese Super Famicom editions because those are a fraction of the price. Mega Man X2 here is called Rockman X2 in Japan, and it costs about 1/10 of the cost of the North American cartridge. It's the same exact game, the only difference is all of the cutscenes are listed in Japanese, and some of the HUD elements are as well. But if you played these games in the past, or if you use a strategy guide, or one of my personal favorite, you use the Google Translate app on your phone to point it towards the screen when you need to see something, that usually works for the most part. The worst case scenario is you can actually look at somebody playing the North American version on some other video streaming site, including this one, and you can see all of the menus the way they were supposed to be translated into English. But because I rented both of these games a lot back in the day for the Super Nintendo, I just never collected them, I was very familiar with these games, enough so to where I didn't have to navigate outside of just seeing the screen to be able to think, oh yeah, this is where this goes, and this is how I go into that room. But for the most part, you're just playing straightforward platforming. There are a few other titles that I've collected just because I feel like it was essential to own. Even though I already have them for the North American Super Nintendo, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of those as well. I actually got my Super Famicom at a video game convention, so I had a wide variety of games to choose from, and I decided to go ahead and pick up Super Mario World #1 because it was complete in the box, but also because I thought I'd like to see if there were any differences between this version and the American version. From what I could tell with my initial playthrough, there wasn't really much that I saw that was different, other than just a few minor graphical differences. Overall, it plays exactly the same except for some of the HUD elements, and all of the story elements are written in Japanese. So with nothing new to report here, if you played Super Mario World and you have it for your North American SNES, you shouldn't have to get it for the Super Famicom. I just really like the way it looks, complete with the box art and manual. I also decided to grab the Super Donkey Kong trilogy. I only got the first one complete in the box because the other two were just loose, and I really find it strange that they renamed it Super Donkey Kong and not any sort of variation of Donkey Kong Country. These games were of the cheaper ones to collect, so I decided to get all three, even though I had all three of them for the Super Nintendo. But again, these games play almost exactly the way I remember them, except for with a few of the HUD elements changed, and of course all the narrative is in Japanese. Long before I actually owned a Super Famicom, I picked up Zelda no Densetsu Kimigami no Triforce, which, as you might guess, is the Japanese version of Zelda Link to the Past. I grabbed this because this was the first Super Famicom title I ever came across out in the wild, and it was available at a price that was very cheap. I think it was $5. But again, if you already have this for the Super Nintendo, I wouldn't see any reason to get it other than the fact that I thought that the cover art on the cartridge looked cool, and it is kind of neat to have some of Nintendo's first-party titles on the Super Famicom. But again, with this being an RPG, the language barrier could come into play. Since I'm very familiar with this title, I was able to get through a lot of the first area with no issues. Along with the Rockman X games, I decided to grab Hoshi no Kirby 3, which is Kirby Dream Land 3, mainly due to the high expense of collecting it in the North American market. Kirby's Dream Land 3 is actually the only Kirby game that is missing from my North American Super Nintendo collection, and that is due to the fact that it's always been at a higher price than I've been willing to pay for it. However, once again, the Super Famicom version was much more feasible for me to collect, so I decided to go ahead and grab it. And this is a game I'm not as familiar with, but I actually had no difficulty picking up and playing it. With it being an action platformer, I don't see this being something that a lot of people would have trouble getting into, even though some of the HUD elements are in Japanese. Again, if you do get stuck on something, using the trick of the Google Translate app or a strategy guide, or looking up a video of somebody playing the same level, should help you be able to figure out anything that you don't understand due to the language barrier. Kirby is one of my all-time favorite franchises from Nintendo, so I was very glad to add this to my collection finally on the Super Nintendo, well, at least the Super Famicom, and I look forward to playing through this game a bit more. Wild Tracks was another game that they had available at the place where I was shopping, so I decided to pick it up because it was really cheap, and this is actually Stunt Tracks FX. I was very curious to grab this because I wanted to know if they made any enhancements or differences between the two games, and nope, this game just plays almost exactly the same as I remember it. Still a neat game to pick up, but one I feel is a lot more dated than the rest due to the choppy frame rates, but this was phenomenal back in the day. Another completely unnecessary crime of opportunity, as it were, is PGA Tour Golf. Some of you who are longtime viewers on my channel will know that I love a good golf video game, and this one, I believe, is one of my favorites from this time period. I really like that this is one of the first golf games to show you hit the ball, and the camera follows the ball, scrolling the playfield as it goes. Definitely capitalizing on that Mode 7 magic. I think what surprised me most about this game is the fact that everything is in English. I wonder if that was true of most games that came over from the US. Super Donkey Kong had translated some of the elements into Japanese, but I did notice anything that was pre-rendered was still in English. Though I'm not sure why PGA Tour Golf didn't get this treatment, I am very happy because it made it very easy to play this game. Panel de Pon was a puzzle game released in the Japanese market, but when I bought this game, I thought it was a Super Famicom exclusive, not actually making its way over to the United States, but I turned out to be wrong about that because once I played the game, I'm like, oh, this is Tetris Attack. But not only did I already have this game for the Super Nintendo, I also have it on the Nintendo Switch. However, I did pick up the Super Famicom version prior to it being released on the Switch. But I mean, it is a pretty decent puzzle game that I do find addicting, and it's not too hard to play even though the instructions to play are in Japanese. Not essential, but a good addition to my collection.
So the last thing I want to talk about is the fact that to play these Japanese games when you import them, you don't actually have to have a Japanese Super Famicom to play them. Yes, you can play them on your North American Super Nintendo, but it takes a little bit of modification. Let's take a look at how Nintendo decided to region lock their games on the Super Nintendo.
When you take a look at the cartridges, they're designed a bit differently between the Super Nintendo and the Super Famicom. Taking a look at my example here of the Mega Man X trilogy, I have Mega Man X itself for the Super Nintendo, and you can tell it has a more boxy shape. But if you flip it around to the back, you'll notice that the Super Nintendo version has these notches cut out of the back, and believe it or not, this is the main way that they region locked their games. Because the Super Famicom games do not have these notches, it will not physically fit into your Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo cartridges are a bit wider, so they won't fit into a Super Famicom. However, there is nothing to stop you from taking the Super Famicom board out of the Super Famicom cartridge and putting it into a North American shell, and then it'll work just fine. I decided to go ahead and use a shell I just had laying around, but you can also get some shells online. Note that because these Rockman cartridges use extra support chips in there, the board is actually a larger board, so it requires a specific type of SNES cartridge,
in order to fit the board in properly.
I will note, because North America and Japan essentially use the same NTSC video output, especially when you're using composites, they're mostly going to be compatible. I haven't run into a case of any of my games that didn't work on my North American Super Nintendo or the SNES 2. However, I haven't tried this out on a PAL console, and I've been told that most of those games are going to be incompatible or show some sort of glitch because the clock speed of their processors or the video output is going to throw something off. Most of those games are displayed in 50 Hz or 50 frames a second, and at a video resolution that most NTSC televisions won't be able to support. But if you imported a PAL console and you got some sort of proper converter or an upscaler like my RetroTink 5X, you will be able to play these games from PAL regions on original hardware. It just takes that hardware to be imported.
So with all said and done, this is the majority of the games that I have imported for my Super Famicom so far. Some of these are eBay finds, some of these are from a retro game store, but the bulk of these have been from that video game convention I mentioned earlier. I am constantly on the lookout for games that were exclusive to Japan, or games that may play better on that system, so if you know of any games that need to be imported into my collection, please let me know in the comments below. I really look forward to seeing what you suggest.
But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look about why I decided to import a Super Famicom for my collection, and how I'm using it to save a boatload of money on collecting for this console.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A special thanks to those Patreons you see on screen. Also, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a like and click that subscribe button on your way out. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.